welcome to Hot St. Augustine. Thank goodness for Mr. Gory and his invention of air conditioning. Yeah, so I'm Allison. I have a really fun job here in St. Augustine. I get to work in the fields that I studied in, and it just so happens to be that it's also a military installation. So this is where I work. It's called St. Francis Barracks, and you can see that obviously at that headquarters for our Florida National Guard, flags are everywhere. They're very visually prominent, and they are at the center of all of the events that take place at the Florida National Guard. So if you look at the image on the left here, that very first flag on the left is a blue one, and that's indicating that the Adjutant General of the Florida National Guard, who is the boss of everybody in the Guard, a 2-star general, that he was from the Air Force at that time. And could we see the body of the flag? There would be 2 white stars on that field of blue indicating his rank as a 2-star Major General. Besides the blue flag is a red flag indicating the flag for a general officer of the Army. And so we have assistant adjutants generals, one for the Army and one for the Air National Guard. These could be 1- or 2-star generals. And currently we happen to have more than 10,000 soldiers in our Florida Army National Guard. So that quantifies its commander to have the rank of a Major General. So he has a 2-star flag. Beside this, on the parade field, you'll notice there's a very tall flagpole. It's about 100 feet tall. And on most days, the U.S. national flag that flies there is a 12 by 18 foot U.S. flag. Of course, the state of flag, Florida flag, is a little bit smaller. But on certain special days of the year, such as Memorial Day, Armed Forces Day, the 4th of July, and Veterans Day, they fly a much larger garrison-sized flag, and that one is 20 by 38 feet. I happened to locate this photo in the archives of the Florida Guard, and it just so worked out that somebody that works with me today recognized one of the individuals in this photo. So I reached out to him and asked, what is this all about? They had this flag flying during the bicentennial celebrations in St. Augustine at the headquarters. And on this day, it happens to be very windy, so it was bending the flagpole too much, and they had to take the flag down. Now, the ceremony, the retreat ceremony, is a traditional military ceremony that pays honor to the national flag when the flag is lowered for the evening at the end of the duty day. And in St. Augustine and in other installations, that event dictates that all of the military personnel that are in uniform at that post must come out and must participate and pay honor to the national colors. So here in St. Augustine, soldiers and airmen have to stand in formation on the parade field. Sometimes this is a very basic event, and there's just a narrator that talks about what is happening. They're lowering the flag. Other times, we'll have some of the commanding general officers and additional guest speakers who will stand on a special platform and address the audience. The traditional Army bugle calls of retreat and to the color cue the soldiers when to stand at attention facing the U.S. flag and when to lower and fold the flags. Now, someone came up to me at the end of one of our retreat ceremonies one year and said, "Why is it called retreat? Are you running away?" No, retreat does not indicate a withdrawal. Rather, it is a term taken from the French word retraite, in reference to the evening ceremony when the unit colors were retired for the day. Retired, retreat. Now, until the early 2000s, there were no lights on our parade field. And so until that time, there would be a soldier that was assigned to come out every day and lower the flag, hold it properly, place it into safekeeping, and then the next morning go out and reinstall the flag on the flagpole. For many years, a retreat ceremony was held on this installation every Friday, and afterwards, the soldiers and airmen of the post would go into the officers' club and they would kick back and conclude their week together. In fact, when we first began discussions of having and hosting your NAVA conference here in St. Augustine back in 2020, it just so happened that the Friday that the Preble Lecture would occur was going to be on Flag Day, Army Birthday. So we had talked about having you come over and watch this retreat ceremony. I'm sorry we couldn't make that happen this year, so I'm trying to bring it to you a little bit. So one more picture I wanted to show. Again, this was in my archive. This was a commemoration 1 year after the attacks of 9/11. And the soldier that took this photo decided to manipulate it to really show how important the national colors are to the members of the military. These two give you an idea of that parade formation with the soldiers and airmen and how prominently displayed the military flags are during these events. And in the next two pictures, you can see that even when people are being retired from the Florida National Guard, they're casing the general officer's colors. Or in the other example here, this lady was the first African-American female to enlist in the Florida Air National Guard. And on her retirement, she's standing right here in front of the general officer's flags being recognized for her piece of her retirement ceremony. The flags are of such importance to the military. And at this headquarters in St. Augustine, flags of each of the major organizations and battalions of the Florida National Guard are prominently displayed in the command section of the Florida National Guard. For units that are on federal deployments, their colors are cased, and you can see that here. If a battalion received campaign participation credit that was authorized by the Center of Military History, their battalion colors will also display campaign streamers. You can see those here. Now, before any further discussion of fun with Florida military flags today, I want to share with you a little bit about the history of St. Francis Barracks. St. Francis Barracks was not always home to the Florida National Guard. Florida's military became the residence of this historic property in 1907. But for the first 175 years or so of European occupation on this property, this site was known as the Convento de San Francisco, and it was headquarters of the Franciscan mission system of La Florida. It was during Florida's British period in the mid-1700s that the Franciscan chapel and friary were converted to a military headquarters and barracks, and thus the symbolism associated with this property was identified by different flags that were here based on the different governments, as Charles mentioned earlier. For the past 200 years, the U.S. flag has flown from St. Francis Barracks. And this person I've included, his image is Lieutenant Alfred Beckley of the 4th U.S. Artillery, who was living at St. Francis Barracks in the 1820s. And in his 1886 memoir, he recalls watching the ships from the cupola, which was about 100 feet above the barracks yard and right under the large U.S. flag. You can barely see it, but it is drawn in this 1830s illustration of the barracks. During the Civil War, there were several different Union troops who were stationed at St. Francis Barracks in St. Augustine. And they included, but were not limited to, the 4th and 7th New Hampshire Volunteers, the 7th, 10th, and 17th Connecticut, the 48th New York, the 24th Massachusetts, the 7th U.S. Army Regiment, the 33rd U.S. Colored Troops, and the 54th Massachusetts Volunteers. So St. Francis Barracks began its use as a military headquarters nearly 260 years ago, and it has been a reservation of the U.S. Army from 1821 to 1900. And from the same headquarters, the Florida National Guard continues a legacy of military heritage that began back in 1565 with the occasion of the first muster of Spanish troops in Florida. Now, we have this original painting in the museum where I work at St. Francis Barracks, and this is what I tell all the soldiers and airmen who come for visits with me and tours of the headquarters, that this is what I want them to remember. Of all the things to remember, This is the birthday of the Florida National Guard, and it occurred on September 16th, 1565, when Pedro Menendez, this figure, decides to march his regular soldiers from St. Augustine to the French Huguenot settlement at Fort Caroline in Jacksonville. Left behind in this newly fortified settlement of St. Augustine are about 100 civilians, and half of them were the men who were authorized and who were qualified to serve as the militia force. This location is the site that we know today as the Fountain of Youth property. So that was the original settlement location of the village of St. Augustine. And from there, those men that were left behind, whether they were mustered or not, we don't really think that matters. But they were there and they were willing and did serve as a local militia company in the event that they were challenged by any other outsiders. So, Florida celebrates this. Florida is not recognized by the federal government, however, as having the first and oldest militia regiment. You probably know which state is recognized. And our joke here in St. Augustine is that by the time Massachusetts was being founded, St. Augustine was up for urban renewal. So we have a very good argument here in St. Augustine in that this is and is nationally recognized as the oldest continuously inhabited European settlement in the continental United States. It doesn't matter that there were various other governments in charge in Florida. There were always men living here in St. Augustine who were willing and who did serve as a member of the local militia. So we celebrate it anyway, and this is one of the several first muster retreats that we've hosted down at St. Francis Barracks. Another one is here. Our friends from the historic Florida militia usually come. They are more than willing to come now, especially since COVID, because the volunteers, they're also volunteers at the National Park Service. They haven't been able to fire the cannons in a couple of years now, so they can come down to St. Francis Barracks, and we love to have them. They do a historic weapons demonstration. And in 2015, when we hosted in St. Augustine, the big 450th birthday of St. Augustine and of Florida National Guard, we invited the reenactors to come and demonstrate a 16th century oath of loyalty to remember that first muster. Now, flags, you've noticed, are included throughout all of these events, whether as representations of units or commander staff or as part of the ceremony itself. The flag is the epitome of military tradition. A military flag is an identity. A military flag is symbolic of the values of an organization. A military flag is at the core of military heritage and heraldry. And many military traditions have developed around the use of these flags. One recruit is given a position of honor as the guide honor bearer for the unit. Flag bearers or roles since ancient times. Losing one's flag or colors was considered disgraceful. His flag was considered honorable. In this painting by Florida artist Jackson Walker, Colonel Richard Gentry leads the colors of the 1st Missouri Volunteer Regiment for its federal service here in Florida to fight Florida Seminoles during the Florida War in late 1837. The flag itself is in the collection of the Missouri State Museum and is considered the oldest of their collection of 445 flags. The silk flag with 26 embroidered stars was made by local women and was presented to the regiment before they left for Florida. Painted on the flag was the regiment's motto. You can kind of see it in the painting. It says, "Gird, gird for the conflict. Our banner we went high. For our country we live. For our country we'll die." Flag bearers like Sergeant Royal Solon of the 39th Illinois Regiment were selected for this honorable position. And in his letters to his dear wife Maggie, Stalin notes that he had earned the respect of his fellow soldiers for his bravery and that she should be proud of his service. Stalin was killed in action on the 16th of August, 1864, in Deep Run, Virginia, as the 39th Illinois was engaged in heavy fire to overtake the enemy's lines. Now, while Gentry and Stalin were not Floridians flying Florida flags, they do have a connection to Florida. Gentry, of course, was in Florida when he was killed fighting the Seminoles at the Battle of Okeechobee on Christmas Day, 1837. And Stalin was killed in Virginia a month after fighting the Florida Brigade during the Civil War. So at this point, I want to reiterate a big thank you to you for inviting me to participate today, because before this preparation of this presentation, I really had not considered about the survival and the location of flags that are outside of the collection that I manage as the Florida National Guard historian. But I wanted to thank Charles specifically, Charles Tingley from the Historical, and also Bruce Gratz from the Museum of Florida History for helping me a lot. Florida's military flags came back in 2005 when I was just filling in as the historian. Our command historian then, Lieutenant Colonel location to another. It wasn't until I came back to work in 2013 and talked with Greg Moore to hear the rest of the story of these flags. Basically, in the late 1990s, our maintenance crew at the Florida National Guard headquarters was told to remove all of the items out of this old warehouse on Riberia Street, which has since been torn down. If you live in town, it's right beside, it used to be right beside the ice plant. But when they began to look at these flags, they realized that the costs associated with conserving the flags really precluded any further action. So off these flags went to storage for another 10 plus years. In the interim, the person who had once discovered these flags in the 90s during that maintenance warehouse conversion time period had been promoted from a captain's rank all the way up to a colonel and was then serving as the state quartermaster, which meant he was in charge of all of the money. And he decided that these flags were important and they needed to be conserved. And so I am forever grateful to a now retired Colonel Tad Warfel for deciding to spend the money and invest in these historic flags, which in our collection of the Florida flag before conservation. Both the 1st and 2nd Regimental flags date to 1899 or 1900. They are very brittle silk with painted state seals on the front. They have metallic thread fringe. And on the back, flags had been treated for their 60s with a substance called polyvinyl alcohol, PVOH, and they were pressure mounted with plywood on the back and a couple of extra layers of fabric. When we sent them up to the conservators, there was a lot of concern that when they removed them from their frames, that the glass might pull away the painted surfaces. And fortunately, that was not an issue, but unfortunately, they were not able to get that PVOH to come out in a solution. So they are still very brittle and very fragile. But this is the finished 2nd Regiment flag in the upper right corner. And you can see that we've encapsulated the silk flag with a light blue colored fabric on the back and a sheer fabric on the front. Again, they're in an archival quality frame that's pressure mounted. and that UV plexiglass on the front is UV resistant. Oh. They're also displayed under low lighting to prevent any further deterioration of the flag. For the first regimental flag, the back of which we can see on the left, I feel very lucky that we have that because the headquarters of the 1st Regiment was historically located in Jacksonville. In Jacksonville in 1901, there was a big fire, and the armory in which this flag and its companion national colors were stored was a total loss. But there was a soldier, a Lieutenant Charles Bisbee Duffy was his name, who ran inside the burning armory and saved the colors of the regiment. In 1909, the designation Florida State Troops changed to that of Florida National Guard. So these flags are already sort of out of date by 1909. Had they been transferred as historic relics here to St. Augustine, to the Arsenal, the state headquarters, they would have been lost in a 1915 fire at St. Francis Barracks. So that's 2 fires that somehow that 1st Regiment flag avoided. And again, with the 2nd Regiment, we're just lucky that they stayed in their home stations until sometime by the 1960s when they became part of this museum display. Now, the oldest flag of the 4 that is under this conservation project is an 1898 flag for the 1st Florida Regiment of Volunteers for the Spanish-American War service. This flag and its national counterpart were presented to the 1st Florida Regiment on July 6, 1898, as recorded in an article in the Tampa Weekly Tribune. And I want to thank Bruce Gratz for bringing this to my attention. Subscribers to the Flag Fund sponsored the manufacture and presentation of these colors for their service during the Spanish-American War. Both the U.S. national colors and that 1st Regiment flag are shown in this image from a 1902 publication. And the national flag in this photo barely survives as fragments today. It is part of the Florida National Guard collection, but it is currently stored at the Museum of Florida History in Tallahassee. However, another U.S. colors that's very similar to that one happens to be in my collection and storage. And it dates to about 1899. We think it's the companion to that 1st Regiment 1899 colors. And you can see what terrible condition it is. So we think that this is likely one that was treated with a PVOH for the display in the 1960s. However, it had never been placed into a frame. So the various moves over time have really led to the deterioration of this flag. And sadly, right now, there are no plans for the conservation of this flag. I wanted to say that I'm really grateful to the women that we have been working with for the conservation of the flags because they've treated the items with great care and consideration, but they've also worked with me to make sure that the soldiers that I work with and myself are satisfied in the outcome. And what we decided to do was not invest in making the flags look brand new and perfect. We wanted them to continue to be able to tell their story, show those lines of deterioration where the flag was on the flag stand for so many years and the light hit those edges of the folds. But when it came to that 1898 1st Florida Volunteer Regimental flag, I had a second look because I had not realized the amount of loss in that field of silk. So rather than use that lighter color underlayment, we decided to go with this darker color underneath to give you a better understanding of what the original flag looked like. This flag and the next flag, that 4th of our collection, will return to Florida next year. This is the 4th flag in our collection to be treated, and it's one from the 1st Florida Infantry. Now you'll notice that the label down here, this is, I took an image of the flag before we sent it for conservation. It says as early as 1897, but again, thanks to Bruce Gratz, he's telling me that this style of the eagle dates it to 1902 or later. In 1917, this flag and its companion national colors would have been presented to the 1st Florida Regiment, which was then stationed at Camp Wheeler near Macon, Georgia. They were getting ready for World War I. The ladies of the Jacksonville Division of the Girls National Honor Guard presented this flag to the regiment, and that supports the theory that this is not a military issue flag. So this first regimental flag, and then there was a second regimental flag in national colors presented to Florida's 2nd Infantry upon their deployment for World War I. They did not see a lot of action in World War I because, as it turns out, the regiments from Florida, when they arrived in France, those regiments were broken up and the individuals served as individuals in various other organizations throughout the war. So the first regiment colors made it back to my collection with the Florida National Guard. The 2nd regiment's colors wound up back at the state capitol, and there they were displayed for many years throughout, even into the 1970s, and they are part of the Museum of Florida History collection today. Now, there was a time in 1908 when there was a controversy over the possible removal of Florida's Confederate battle flags from the state capitol. At that time, Florida's Adjutant General, Clifford Foster, who was from St. Augustine, was relocating his headquarters from the old state capitol in Tallahassee back here to St. Augustine for St. Francis Barracks. Discussions revealed that there were strong sentiments from Florida war veterans who opposed the removal of these flags to St. Augustine. But a 1908 newspaper article noted that Adjutant General Foster addressed Confederate veterans in a letter to explain that he never contemplated moving the flags from the Capitol, and on the contrary, had taken all the steps he could to protect them from damage and to display them at their present abiding place where they should properly be kept for all future time. And there they are today over in the Museum of Florida History Collection. From Charles a little bit, there are some other flags from St. Augustine that are part of the American Civil War Museum and other locations around town. I have other flags in my collection, which are still in storage. This is part of that 1960s museum display that came down in the 1980s. If you hear of any of Florida's military flags, please do let me know. I would love to learn more about them. So again, thank you for your time this afternoon. It's been my great pleasure to share with you. I hope you have a wonderful visit to St. Augustine. Thank you.